All right, guys, welcome back, Bloodbath Racing. So the video we did about the dump valve got a lot of questions and a lot of people asking about, how it worked and that kind of thing. Well, we finally got the engine running again, so now I'm going to do a little test today, and we'll see how much of a difference the dump valve makes as far as spool up and how much it drops the pressure. Go over some different ways you can activate it and use it for spool up and power management. If you're on a slick track, you can turn it off later after, maybe even the 60 foot to loosen the converter up a bunch. Just different things you can do to, different ways you can utilize it basically to improve your performance. All right, guys, we're going to do 2 trans brake tests, one with dump, one without. All right, guys, here we have the 2 data logs from those 2 trans brake tests. And in all fairness, the first test with the dump activated, the transmission was completely cold, which does help it spool up, or it slows down the spool up somewhat. As the fluid gets hot, it frees the converter up a little bit and it spools a little easier. But as you can see here, it got to the 2-step in like 3.5 or 4 seconds. Now, keep in mind, I have a very tight converter combination in this car, and the engine doesn't have a lot of compression because the piston and rod combination I've got right now, it's only 9-to-1 compression. So on cold converter, it got to the trans brake in 3.98, we'll call it 4 seconds. It got to the 2-step on the trans brake with the dump activated. Without the dump activated, with fluid that was considerably warmer, it took 5.4 seconds to get to the 2-step. And as you can see, it didn't really change a whole lot as far as the flash RPM of the converter. I mean, it virtually flashed the exact same, like 2,900. The trans pressure, however, is drastically different. Without the dump, trans pressure is 100. With the dump, it's like 13. Which in a prior test with the transmission up to temperature, it dumps it down to like 6 typically. And you see here, without the dump, I didn't build quite as much boost. I only built it up, I stayed in it to 7.1 pounds without the dump. And that took 6.9 seconds. Still raceable if you're trying to leave on 7 pounds, but barely. But the tune-up that's in the car usually will leave on 8.5, 8.6. So, as you can see here, with the dump activated, it got the full launch boost, 8.5 at 6.3 seconds. It got to 7.1, which is comparable to the other test, in 5.9 seconds. So, it was basically, it knocked a second off of getting to 7 pounds. But I would say it probably knocked easily a second off of getting the launch boost of 8 pounds, 8.5 pounds. And, you know, leaving at 8.3 pound, that should be, you know, 6.3 seconds that's pretty raceable of getting to launch boost. And like I said, with the temperature up, I think it would be a little quicker than that. Now without the dump and the temperature was up, it took it 6.9 seconds to get to 7.1. So I'm going to say it would be, you know, it would be close to 8 seconds or so before it got to full launch boost, which isn't very raceable. I mean, you can maybe make that work a couple of ways, but it's definitely not ideal by any means. So basically the real tale of the tale is that it doesn't affect flash RPM, almost virtually none. Even though the trans pressure is different, you know, the charge pressure, it very little affected launch RPM or flash RPM. However, it allowed it to go through the converter much quicker. You know, it got to the two-step. Like I say, it got to the two-step a second and a half quicker. As you can see, it's 5.48 there without the dump activated. And down here, it gets to the two-step at right there, 3.9. So it's a full second and a half quicker to the two-step. And it builds boost better because of that. I mean, you can see at this point, with the dump activated, it's making 1.5 to 2 pounds, 2 pounds of boost. So it's like a full pound ahead with the dump activated, and sometimes more, you know, up to 2.2 pounds difference there. So the dump definitely helps. I mean, this combination with this converter and the engine combination the way it is would not even remotely be raceable without the dump, honestly. So we're going to go into some other ways. We'll minimize this. It's just where I downloaded the two data logs that we did back to back. So we go here to your outputs, our dump valve here. We go to configuration. As you see, I have it. Basically, it's activated the whole time the trans brake is enabled, and RPM is above 2,500. The reason I did it that way is because you have to activate the trans brake button to back the car up, and I didn't want it dumping while I was trying to back up. There's no point. So I just did it that way. Now you could also enable a secondary deactivation. So you could have it to where it doesn't release, or it doesn't close the dump until, say, you leave the line at 4,000 RPMs. You may want it to, you may not want to close the dump valve until, you know, 5,500. If your converter's super tight and it only flashes 4,800, 4,900, 5,000, you may want to wait to 5,000 to close the dump, and then by the time it catches up with the converter, it generally is about a half a second to fill the converter up and build the charge pressure back. So you may want to wait, you know, that half a second. So say you may close your dump at 5,000 RPMs. So like I say, you may want to close your dump valve after launch. So if you're trying to free the converter up, or you're on a really tricky racetrack, you may want to delay that as far as 6,000 RPMs, or you may want to delay it by time after the release of the trans brake, all of which is possible with the Holley EFI. I think Devin Vanderhoof actually has a video on that. And you have options to free the converter up, and, you know, for traction, or just to get the car to move early, or keep it from knocking the tires off. You know, if the converter is super tight, it makes them temperamental early in the run, and you can free it up that way. Other options you have is, you know, if you don't necessarily need the dump to be super aggressive, to dump the pressure down to 10 pounds or 6 pounds to spool the turbo. Secondary use for the dump is you could potentially pulse it, or you can put a jet in line in the dump line, so it's not a free flowing dump of, say, you know, a -6 line, whatever that flows. you can drill the fitting and put a nitrous jet in there, or tap it and put a set screw and drill a brass set screw. There's many ways to do it. What I typically do is I drill the inside of the number 6 fitting that the line screws on and put a nitrous jet in there, which works very easy, and a lot of people have nitrous jets at the track. So if you're at the track and you need a different size jet, you know, they're pretty readily available. So that's how I tend to do it a lot of times. If you look at the end of these fittings right there, you can just drill the flare of it right there just a little bit, and you can fit a nitrous jet up in there to change your pressure. So, you know, say for instance, you don't need the dump necessarily to spool the turbo, but it helps, and you want to just loosen the converter up some, you maybe could put a 100,000th jet in there, and it'll allow you to bypass some of the fluid pressure, but not all of it. So you could maybe leave that dump activated for the first second or 2 seconds of the run, so it doesn't, you know, blow right through the converter, but it also loosens it up to where it can flash up to 6,000, and you can get the car moving before you really lock the converter up in the top of low gear. There's really infinite options. It's just another tool that you can use to improve your performance at the track or street. You know, for instance, if you have a car like this that's set up for radial prep most of the time, and you run a super tight converter package just because you're trying to get all the performance you can, it may allow you to use that same converter in a no prep, or, you know, tracks that aren't really glued up. Instead of struggling all day, you can probably loosen the converter up with the dump. You could even put a small jet in it and leave the dump active the whole day, depending on how much power you're using. You know, I've had situations where I would change the jet in the transmission before I had the dump, and, you know, I could loosen the converter up enough by changing the pressure that it would go from being pretty tight, you know, to where I could go really fast, to where it was so loose that it would blow through the converter in high gear, and it would get to the rev limiter, you know, if I had all the boost on it. But under those circumstances, most of the time you're not going to use all the power you have, so you can loosen the converter up to suit the amount of power that you can apply that day. But I just wanted to do a little video for you guys, because a lot of people ask about the dump and how it worked, and that just shows that I would say the $35 dump valve is a success. Probably have 50 bucks in it with the fittings and everything, but it's still considerably cheaper than most of them out there. And it does exactly what I needed to do. Without that dump, this combination wouldn't really be raceable. I mean, I could maybe, you know, manipulate it some and get it to where I could race it, but I would probably have to foot brake it in the top bulb, and you really open yourself up with a turbo car to get burned down if you got a combination that's really difficult to spool, because then, you know, you have no choice but to start spooling early, because you can't get hung out there and not be able to get full boost. So, you know, we just try and make it as raceable as we can. That way, you know, you don't set yourself up for failure, basically. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to message me or comment on the video. You know, most of you guys, a lot of you guys have me on Facebook. You can message me, you know, if you have any questions about the dump valve. A lot of you already have. But don't forget to like and subscribe, follow along. We'll have some on-track testing, hopefully, this weekend maybe. I think Darlington has a radial test Saturday. We may go down to South Carolina Motorplex. My buddy Tommy down there runs the show, and he always takes really good care of us. Both really good facilities that should be really glued up. So maybe we'll get some testing data this weekend, have some footage. All right, guys, thanks.